Formal criteria for evaluation. Before moving on to the subject of the fruits of good and bad actions, here are some quotes from the Pali Canon in reference to the aforementioned material. And what are wholesome phenomena? The three wholesome roots, i.e. non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion. The feeling aggregate, the perception aggregate, the volitional formation aggregate, and the consciousness aggregate, which are accompanied by these wholesome roots: physical actions, verbal actions, and mental actions, which originate from these wholesome roots. These are wholesome phenomena. And what are unwholesome phenomena? The three unwholesome roots, i.e. greed, hatred, and delusion, and all mental defilements based on the same foundations as these unwholesome roots: the feeling aggregate, the perception aggregate, the volitional formation aggregate, and the consciousness aggregate, which are accompanied by these unwholesome roots: physical actions, verbal actions, and mental actions, which originate from these unwholesome roots. These are unwholesome phenomena. There are two kinds of dangers: revealed dangers and concealed dangers. And what are revealed dangers? Lions, tigers, leopards, bears, wolves, bandits, eye ailments, ear ailments, nose ailments, cold, heat, hunger, thirst, defecation, urination, contact with wind, sun, biting flies, and creeping things. These are called revealed dangers. And what are concealed dangers? Immoral bodily contact, verbal contact, and mental action, the hindrance of sensual desire, ill will, sloth, and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt, greed, hatred, and delusion, anger, resentment, disparagement, i.e. invalidating and concealing the goodness of others, arrogance, conceit, jealousy, miserliness, deceit, boastfulness, obstinacy, competitiveness, disdain, infatuation, and heedlessness, all mental defilement, all dishonesty, all agitation, all craving, all distress, and all unwholesome thinking. These are called concealed dangers. On account of what are things called a danger? On account of domination, on account of leading to decline, on account of being a dwelling place. On account of what are things called a danger due to domination? Those dangers impair, overwhelm, intimidate, tyrannize, oppress, and ravage that person. On account of what are things called a danger due to leading to decline? Those dangers lead to decline of wholesome qualities. On account of what are things called a danger due to being a dwelling place? Those evil, unwholesome states arise internally, dependent on one's individuality, attabhava, in the same way as a creature dependent on a whole lives in a whole. A creature dependent on water lives in water. A creature dependent on forest lives in the forest. A creature dependent on a tree lives in a tree. This accords with what the Blessed One said: monks, a monk who has both students and a teacher dwells in suffering, not in comfort. And how does a monk who has both students and a teacher dwell in suffering, not in comfort? When the eye sees a form, the ear hears a sound, the nose smells an odor, the tongue tastes a flavor, the body contacts a tangible, the mind cognizes a mental object. There arise in him evil, unwholesome states, covetous thoughts leading to binding defilements. Evil and wholesome states dwell within him. For this reason he is called one who has students. Those evil and wholesome states provoke him. For this reason he is called one who has a teacher. It accords with what the Blessed One said. Monks, these three things are inward stains, inward enemies, inward foes, inward executioners, inward nemesis. What three? Greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed causes harm and agitates the mind. If someone fails to discern that it is a danger arising internally, greed enters and he recognizes neither its essence nor its practical significance. When greed dominates the mind, there is only darkness. Hatred causes harm. Delusion causes harm. There is only darkness. It accords with what the Blessed One said. There are, great King, three things which, when they arise within a person, arise for his harm, suffering, and discomfort. What three? Greed, hatred, and delusion. Just as bamboo seeds destroy the bamboo tree, so too greed, hatred, and delusion arising within destroy an evil-minded person. There are, great King, three things in the world which, when they arise for one's harm, suffering, and discomfort. What are the three? Greed, hatred, and delusion. Monks, there are these three unwholesome roots. What three? The unwholesome root, greed, the unwholesome root, hatred, and the unwholesome root, delusion. Greed in itself is unwholesome. Whatever deed a greedy person performs by body, speech, and mind is also unwholesome. When a greedy person overcome by greed, whose mind is impaired by greed, inflicts suffering upon another by killing, imprisoning, dispossessing, censuring, or banishing, thinking, I am powerful, I am mighty, that too is unwholesome. Thus numerous evil, unwholesome qualities originate in him, born of greed, caused by greed, arisen from greed, conditioned by greed. Hatred in itself is unwholesome. Whatever deed a hateful person performs by body, speech, and mind is also unwholesome. When a hateful person, overcome by hate, inflicts suffering upon another, that too is unwholesome. Thus numerous evil, unwholesome qualities originate in him, born of hate, caused by hate, arisen from hate, conditioned by hate. Delusion itself is unwholesome. Whatever deed a deluded person performs by body, speech, and mind is also unwholesome. When a deluded person, overcome by delusion, inflicts suffering upon another, that too is unwholesome. This numerous evil, unwholesome qualities originate in him, born of delusion, caused by delusion, arisen from delusion, conditioned by delusion. Such a person, overcome by evil, unwholesome qualities, born of greed, born of hate, born of delusion, with his mind impaired by them, dwells in suffering in this very life, with distress, anguish, and fever, and with the breakup of the body after death, a bad destination can be expected for him. Suppose a saul, a myrtle, or kusum tree was choked and enveloped by three maluva creepers. It would meet with decline, decay, destruction, and disaster. So too, such a person, overcome by bad, unwholesome qualities, born of greed, born of hatred, born of delusion, dwells in suffering in this very life, and with the breakup of the body after death, a bad destination can be expected for him. There are amongst these three wholesome roots. What three? The wholesome root, non-greed, the wholesome root, non-hatred, the wholesome root, non-delusion. Monks, there are these three causes for the origination of Kamma. What three? greed, hatred, and delusion. Any volitional action performed by way of greed, born of greed, caused by and originating from greed, is unwholesome and harmful and results in suffering. That kamma leads to the origination of further kamma, kamma samudaya, not to the cessation of kamma, kamma nirodha. Any volitional action performed by way of hatred, performed by way of delusion, results in suffering. That kamma leads to the origination of further kamma, not to the cessation of kamma. There are amongst these three other causes for the origination of kamma. What three? Non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion. Any volitional action performed by way of non-greed, born of non-greed, caused by and originating from non-greed, is wholesome and harmless and results in happiness. That kamma leads to the cessation of kamma, not to the origination of kamma. Any volitional action performed by way of non-hatred, performed by way of non-delusion, results in happiness. That kamma leads to the cessation of kamma, not to the origination of kamma. When kalamas you know for yourselves, these things are unwholesome, these things are harmful, these things are censured by the wise, these things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. What do you think, kalamas? When greed arises in a person, is it for his welfare or for his harm? For his harm, venerable sir. A greedy person, overcome by greed, with mind impaired by it, destroys a life, takes what is not given, transgresses with another's wife, and speaks falsehood, and he encourages others to do likewise, which will lead to his harm and suffering for a long time. That is true, venerable sir. When hatred arises in a person, when delusion arises in a person, a deluded person destroys life, which will lead to his harm and suffering for a long time. That is true, venerable sir. What do you think, kalamas? Are these things wholesome or unwholesome? Unwholesome, venerable sir. Harmful or harmless? Harmful, venerable sir. Censored or praised by the wise? Censured, venerable sir. Accepted and undertaken, do they lead to harm and suffering or not? Or how do you take it? Accepted and undertaken, these things lead to harm and suffering, so we take it. Thus, kalamas, when we said, come kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, do not go out of respect, thinking this ascetic is our guru. When you know it for yourselves, these things are unwholesome, these things are harmful, these things are censured by the wise, these things, if accepted and undertaken, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. It was because of this that this was said. The following sutta passage contains a question and answer session between King Pasenadi of Kosala and Venerable Ananda on the meaning of good and evil. Here Ananda links the various criteria mentioned above. Venerable Sir, we do not recognize anything of value in the praise and blame of others spoken by foolish, ignorant persons who speak without having investigated and evaluated, but we recognize as valuable the praise and blame of others spoken by wise, intelligent, and sagacious persons who speak after investigating and evaluated. Now, Venerable Ananda, what kind of bodily behavior, verbal behavior, mental behavior is censured by wise recluses and Brahmins? Any bodily, verbal, mental behavior that is unwholesome, great king. Now, what kind of bodily, verbal, and mental behavior is unwholesome? Any bodily, verbal, mental behavior that is harmful. Now, what kind of bodily, verbal, mental behavior is harmful? any bodily, verbal, mental behavior that is oppressive. Now, what kind of bodily, verbal, mental behavior is oppressive? Any bodily, verbal, mental behavior that leads to suffering. Now, what kind of bodily, verbal, mental behavior leads to suffering? Any bodily, verbal, mental behavior that leads to one's own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both, and on account of which unwholesome states increase and wholesome states diminish. Precisely such bodily, verbal, mental behavior is censured by wise recluses and Brahmins, great king. Venerable Ananda then replies to questions pertaining to the wholesome, ending with this passage: any bodily, verbal, mental behavior that does not lead to one's own affliction, or to the affliction of others, or to the affliction of both, and on account of which unwholesome states diminish and wholesome states increase. Precisely such bodily, verbal, mental behavior, great king, is uncensured by wise recluses and Brahmins. One inflamed by lust, overcome by lust, with mind enthralled by it, intends for his own affliction, for the affliction of others, and for the affliction of both, and he experiences mental anguish and suffering. But when lust is abandoned, he does not intend for his own affliction, for the affliction of others, or for the affliction of both, and he does not experience mental anguish and suffering. One is inflamed by lust, overcome by lust, with mind enthralled by it, engages in misconduct by body, speech, and mind, but when lust is abandoned, one does not engage in misconduct by body, speech, and mind. One inflamed by lust, overcome by lust, with mind enthralled by it, does not understand as it really is his own good, the good of others, or the good of both. But when lust is abandoned, one understands as it really is one's own good, the good of others, and the good of both. One full of hate, overcome by hate, one deluded, overcome by delusion, experiences mental anguish and suffering. But when delusion is abandoned, one understands as it really is one's own good, the good of others, and the good of both. A deed is not well done when, after having it done, one is distressed, and when weeping with tearful face one reaps its fruit. A deed is well done when, after having done it, one is not distressed, and when pleased and delighted one reaps its fruit. Whatever action is performed is visible within oneself. Verily, an evil deed committed does not immediately bear fruit, just as fresh milk curdles not at once. Smouldering, it follows the fuel like fire covered with ashes. Whoever acted wrongly before, but is restrained and turns to the good, such a one illumines this world like the moon freed from clouds. The meritorious deeds one has done, that is one's friend in the future. Ananda, I have declared definitely that deeds of bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct are not to be done, because in acting thus, these dangers are to be expected. One blames oneself, the wise, having investigated, censure one, a bad report circulates about one dies confused, and with the breakup of the body after death one is reborn in the plane of misery, in a bad destination in the lower world, in hell. Ananda, I have declared definitely that deeds of bodily good conduct, verbal good conduct, and mental good conduct are to be done, because in acting thus, these blessings are to be expected. One does not blame oneself, the wise, having investigated, praise one. A good reputation circulates about one dies unconfused, and with the breakup of the body after death, One is reborn in a good destination, in a heavenly world. Monks abandon the unwholesome. It is possible to abandon the unwholesome. If it were not possible to abandon the unwholesome, I would not say, monks abandon the unwholesome. But because it is possible to abandon the unwholesome, I say, monks abandon the unwholesome. If abandoning the unwholesome led to harm and suffering, I would not tell you to abandon it. But because the abandoning of unwholesome leads to the welfare and happiness, I say, monks abandon the unwholesome. Monks develop the wholesome. It is possible to develop the wholesome. If it were not possible to develop the wholesome, I would not say, monks develop the wholesome. But because it is possible to develop the wholesome, I say, monks develop the wholesome. If developing the wholesome led to harm and suffering, I would not tell you to develop it. But because the developing of the wholesome leads to welfare and happiness, I say, monks develop the wholesome. Monks, there are things to be abandoned by body, not by speech. There are things to be abandoned by speech, not by body. There are things to be abandoned neither by body nor speech, but by having clearly seen with wisdom. And what are the things to be abandoned by body, not by speech? Here a monk has committed a particular unwholesome transgression with the body. His wise fellow monks investigate him and say thus, you have committed a particular unwholesome transgression with the body. It would be really good if you would abandon bodily misconduct and develop bodily good conduct. When his wise fellow monks investigate him and admonish him, he abandons bodily misconduct and develops bodily good conduct. These are called things to be abandoned by body, not by speech. And what are the things to be abandoned by speech, not by body? Here a monk has committed a particular unwholesome transgression by speech. His wise fellow monks investigate him and say thus, you have committed a particular unwholesome transgression by speech. It would be really good if you would abandon verbal misconduct and develop verbal good conduct. When his wise fellow monks investigate him and admonish him, he abandons verbal misconduct and develops verbal good conduct. These are called things to be abandoned by speech, not by body. And what are things to be abandoned neither by body nor by speech, but by having clearly seen with wisdom? Greed, hatred, delusion, anger, hostility, contempt, arrogance, miserliness is to be abandoned, neither by body nor by speech, but by having clearly seen with wisdom.